Connecticut's casinos are making changes to its COVID-19 protocols. Mohegan Sun announcing guests and team members who are fully vaccinated no longer have to wear a mask while on the reservation. Tribal officials say guests are still more than welcome, of course, to wear a mask if they choose to do so. The resort and casino will still be doing temperature checks, but they will be monitored remotely at entrances to the property. Mohegan Sun is looking to bring back more live entertainment and concerts to its arena, with many shows scheduled through the end of the year. Foxwoods taking a bit more of a cautious approach here. The Mashantucket Pequot tribe says face masks will still be required throughout the property. Foxwoods plans on cautiously easing some of its other COVID-19 protocols, including capacity restrictions. The resort and casino will keep up with continuous cleaning of high-touch areas. Social distancing on the property is being scaled back from 6 feet to 3 feet.
New number